All right. Well, I believe it is 6 o'clock, so let's get things kicked off tonight. So welcome to those of you who are here. Aside from the little time hiccup here, we'll hopefully have a few more people joining us as we go along. Welcome to tonight's Excel track for the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group meeting. I'm Ken. I think we've got Scott with us. He's going to be doing our feature presentation. I'm just going to go through and run through our standard intro slides here. So the schedule that we have for today, we're now into the welcome and overview, and we'll be getting into the feature presentation in just a couple of minutes. I don't think it's going to take me 5 to say the bit that I got to say here, and that's when Scott's going to talk to us about instant diagrams with Excel and Visio. So looking forward to seeing some stuff there. I want to throw out a big thanks to the sponsors that make this stuff possible. Excel Guru is my company that puts this thing together, arranges the speakers. Sometimes that's not hard, like Scott, who volunteers for us. Other times we got to go out and find a few, but that effort is all done by the Excel Guru company on the back end. Skillwave is our training division, so if you're looking for great content for training in Excel and Power BI, that's the place to go. We've got some awesome courses there. Microsoft helps us out, gives us the software that we can actually do to run these meetings, even though we're not actually doing things in person these days. And the last thing I want to throw out is just a quick shout out to Monkey Tools, which is an add-in that I built to help make your life with Excel and Power BI easier. One of the big things I want to call out with that is that we actually just released a new pro feature for Monkey Tools that we're super excited about. If you are building Excel and Power BI models, one of the things that you may realize is that you can import from Excel to Power BI, but nobody goes back from Power BI to Excel if you need to get back to Excel to do further data modeling. At least nobody except us, because earlier this week we just announced that we now actually in Monkey Tools actually have the ability to import from Power BI back to Excel. And if you want to actually check that out and see a demo of how it works and everything else, I just actually announced this in Reed Haven's webcast earlier this week, and that is on YouTube, so you can actually check out that link right there, and it'll allow you to see near the end how we can actually go through and do this. So kind of a cool little thing there. Our next meetups that are coming up, we've got a new speaker to the Vancouver Power BI user group coming up on Thursday, June 17th. That's going to be Daniel Hughes. It's going to be talking about process mining in Power BI and creating value from the business process. So that's going to be pretty cool. And then our next Excel track, I'm going to be taking that on. For those of you who have actually created pivot charts, you know that there's a lot of different charts that we can't create using pivot charts, like waterfall charts and hierarchy charts. I'm going to show you how we can. We can build those against the data model, despite the fact that we can't actually use pivot charts to do that. So it's going to be kind of an interesting time. First time I've ever done this topic, so hopefully it's going to work. That's the big thing we're looking forward to there. If you're interested in coming on to our forum and doing a speaking slot, we would love to hear from you. Fill out this little survey here at excelguru.ca/speakadvanpug. We'll get in contact and would love to have you come and take the floor and show us some of the cool things that you can do with Excel and Power BI. It doesn't have to be related to Power Query or Power Pivot. We can do all kinds of things, whether Excel related or even just like connecting to Excel, kind of like what Scott's going to show us today. Always good to see how other products interact with the tools that we use on a daily basis. And I believe that's the last slide that I actually have for this, Scott. So at this point in time, we're going to turn it over to you for the feature presentation. So if you want to take over the screen, the floor is totally yours, my friend.
Excellent. I appreciate the opportunity to be back here again.
No worries.
Let me share and get a slide up here. I'm actually intrigued by the next session coming up on process mining. That's a topic I know only a little bit about, but I've been intrigued by a number of demos I've seen at business process conferences at which I speak fairly regularly, because I am principally a business process consultant. What I know about Visio and Power BI and Excel and all the interactions among them is all derived largely from the fact that I just realized it doesn't look like my camera is working.
You know what? That's not a big deal.
Sure
I mean, if you want to stay on, you can, but if you don't, no big deal. But I mean, here's the good news, Scott. You know where you can actually find that session, and you know what? We'll let you in for free, just like we do everybody else.
What a bargain, right?
I know, indeed.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Scott here quickly. Just one quick note: I am going to be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have questions for Scott's materials as you go along, please just fire them into the chat, and I'll interrupt Scott and make sure that he gets those questions questions so that he can answer them. Outside of that, I'm going to turn off my camera, and I think I'll turn off everybody's but Scott, so that we can hopefully bring you back on screen.
Okay.
And I'll just watch for mics and things like that as well. So I'm going to go quiet until we get a question that we need to interrupt you with.
Okay.
All right.
Actually, I just realized what the issue is with camera, and that is that I'm screen sharing. And in Teams, you don't do both at the same time, unlike many platforms. So,
Are you sure? I thought that you could. I mean, I could be wrong.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what it probably is. I'm using the web app, the Teams web app. And it probably is Teams app versus Teams web app. So
yeah, that could be.
Because if I hover over my camera icon, it says you can share your video when you're done screen sharing. So
nice.
It's how polite is it? How polite is that, right?
That's actually kind of funny. And it's funny because I mean, I'm looking here and I was thinking I was actually going to turn off everybody's cameras, but I actually don't see an option for me to do that. So maybe turn off incoming video will do it. Oh, there we go. Okay, awesome. So now we can focus full screen on what you got, I think. So there we go.
Okay.
I think you're set to go.
Great. Good. Glad to hear it. So yeah, the topic tonight is similar to what I did 6 months ago for this group, in that it's all about Visio and its integration with something. Last time I was focusing more on Visio as a means for visualizing data and integrating with Power BI and dropping a Visio visual into a Power BI report. Tonight, the focus is on Visio and Excel. So what can we do with that combination that's different from what we talked about last time? So last time we did look at integrating Visio with Excel in the sense of using Excel as a data repository, linking a Visio diagram to data in Excel, and then being able to visualize that using the facilities that are built into Visio. And that's all fairly cool. Tonight, the focus is different. Tonight, we're going to start with data in Excel and let the combination of Visio and Excel build stuff for us, build diagrams for us. I'll give you a quick preview of that in just a second. And in fact, the idea is what's encapsulated on these next two slides. We're going to start with a bunch of data like this, data where each row in an Excel workbook represents a step in a process. And then we're going to push a button and end up with something like this. So it is truly as automatic as the big word at the bottom of the slide suggests. And it looks sort of like what you'll see in just a moment. So we're going to talk about using Visio to create diagrams from data that resides in Excel. What's kind of cool about this, I appreciated your comment earlier, Ken, about saying everybody takes data from Excel and puts it into Power BI and never goes back the other way. In this particular case, we have that ability here. This is a case where we're going to use data in Excel, bring it into Visio, and the two are synchronized with each other. So I can actually make changes in either place and have the other updated automatically. If you go to the trouble of building a paired set of diagram and workbook that you use to create and maintain a process map, wouldn't it be nice if you could share that conveniently with others? And that's exactly what a special type of data visualizer template package is all about. And by the way, data visualizer is the name that Microsoft gave to this particular capability that I will be demonstrating this evening. Then we're going to move on to Excel as the focus. So up to that point, Visio is the focal point. What can we do to get data from Excel and bring it into Visio to create a diagram? Then we're going to look at starting with Excel. And since that, for many of you, that is your starting point more routinely than Visio, perhaps, it's an important part of the conversation. And indeed, as you'll see, or you can already tell from the bullet points, it's actually possible to create a Visio diagram inside Excel without even having a Visio license. So for many of you, I hope that will be a liberating thought and an actuality by the time we're finished. And we probably aren't going to get to this tonight, but one of the things that you can do once you have any data in a Visio diagram is to visualize that data in a variety of ways. So if you're building a flowchart or a swimlane diagram, and you've incorporated other data about the steps in the process besides just a description, Visio lets you visualize that. Part of the reason I'm not going to probably won't get to that is because that is a lot of what we talked about 6 months ago when I was last here. So keep that in mind if you were here 6 months ago. If not, I'll give you some resources at the end, places you can go aside from the recording of the 6 month ago session, other places you can go to learn more about visualizing data in Visio. Hence the Visio resources. Feel free to ask questions as we go. As Ken said, he's going to be moderating in order to keep me from having to look at 3 different screens at once and pick up on the chat. So thank you, Ken. Quick background. Yes, I'm principally a business process consultant, as I started to say a few minutes ago. Along the way in helping organizations to define business processes, either existing processes or help them define future state processes, one of the things that we discovered is that it was really hard for people to document processes effectively. They all knew how to create flowcharts, but flowcharts are essentially just boxes with text on them. What we wanted to help our clients create was data-rich, content-rich process maps. So we invented this thing called Task Map. Task Map is, as the tagline suggests, a way for everyone to create processes more easily. And it is centered on Visio. It runs as a Visio add-in, and it does indeed create content-rich process maps. Well, it was in the process of helping to design this Task Map add-in that I ended up learning a little bit about Visio along the way, to the point that Microsoft noticed in 2008 and said, "Hey, congratulations, you're now an MVP for Visio." I'll be honest, first thing I had to do was learn what the MVP program was because I hadn't run across it before. But having had the privilege of being named an MVP every year since then, I've come to appreciate the community of other Visio experts, at least one of whom is on the line here in the session tonight, and the others around the world. We truly learn from each other all the time, and the access that we have to the product team at Microsoft is an unparalleled experience for a bunch of outsiders. I have created courses for LinkedIn Learning. There are 6 of them now, and they are all centered on Visio. One of them is a little bit more focused on generically creating flowcharts and sort of best practices for creating flowcharts. The examples I use happen to be Visio. And I've written a few books, not as many as Ken, but a couple of books about a subject or two related to Visio. So what are we going to do? Let's take a look at how you get started, and the key to how, excluding where we're going to end up at the very end, which is how you can do this just with Excel. The key to getting started is to have the subscription version of Visio known as Visio Plan 2. So if you happen to have, even if you have Visio 2019 or 2016 or 2013, this data visualizer capability is not part of any of those traditional perpetual license versions of Visio. So Visio Plan 2 is the key. There is a Visio Plan 1, by the way. It's a browser-based capability for creating Visio diagrams, and it lets you create legitimate, true Visio diagrams in any browser on virtually any device. But that does not have this data visualizer capability either. So specifically, you need a subscription to Visio Plan 2. Included with Plan 2 are several new templates. So in addition to the 60 or 70 other templates that are part of, say, Visio 2019 Professional, there is a flowchart template for data visualizer, a swimlane diagram version, and one for creating audit diagrams. So at the moment, those are the 3 key new templates that are part of Visio Plan 2 for this particular purpose. The parallel or companion templates that are part of the data visualizer capability are Excel templates. And those are accessible either from within Visio. This is if you click on the thumbnail for the flowchart data visualizer template in Visio, this is the little pop-up screen you'll see. And as you can see outlined in red, there's a section of it where if you need to get a copy of the corresponding Excel template, just click where it says Excel data template, and bingo, you'll have a pre-formatted template appear. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment or so. This is a couple of screenshots. Rather than show you screenshots, I will put those on the screen here, and then let's go to an actual version of that template. What I love about this, it's actually a really nicely designed template. So here's the first tab in this pre-formatted template. It's an overview of the subject. It says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to add process data, import to Visio, and then get your diagram. So it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, and a couple of pictures of what that might look like. But more importantly, on the next tab is an example. So here's a set of data. And this is the actual flowchart that set of data will create when you click the button that says Go. And there is a detailed explanation of each column, each data field that is part of this process. I'm going to step through those with you in a moment. But the good news is it's all here. And then there is the formatted tab on which you actually enter your own data. So I'm going to come back to this particular data in just a moment. But for right now, let's continue with a couple more slides. Data. Here's, I said I would touch on the data types. The first two columns in the template are a simple unique ID, and that can be alphanumeric. I happen to use numbers in this case, but alpha is fine. A unique ID for each step in a process, and a description for each step in the process. Then there is a third column that, as you can imagine, if Visio is going to build a diagram for you from data, your data needs to include connectivity information. So that's exactly what this column is all about, telling us that, for example, after step 100, the next step ID is 102. After step 101, is 101. After step 101 comes 102. So those three columns are the bare minimum. You must have data in those three in order for Visio to be able to build a diagram for you. Then there is a fourth column that says connector label. And this is kind of what it sounds like. If you think of the connectors as the arrows that are between shapes in a flowchart, this is your chance to specify what text should be on those arrows. So down here, for example, we have what looks like it's probably, back up, looks like it's probably a decision at step 107. It says candidate accepts, ? The next step ID is two things. There's, in one case, we go to 201 next. In another case, we go to 105. So the corresponding labels, and notice those are both separated by commas, 201, 205, and yes, no. So the arrow that goes to 201 will be labeled yes, and so forth. This, though optional, is certainly highly desirable. And then you can either let Visio make its own best guesses, or even better, you can tell Visio which shapes to use for each step in the process. The names of these shapes in the shape type column correspond exactly to what you're familiar with in the stencils that accompany a Visio flowchart or swim lane diagram. So this is a process, this is a decision, this is a start, this is an end, and so forth. So while optional, those are certainly very helpful bits of information to add. Otherwise, Visio is either left guessing and your arrows will be blank, and that's probably less desirable. And finally, you can include any other data columns that you want. So if you want to take advantage of Visio's ability to store data inside shapes, whether it's eventually to visualize some of that data or for any other reason, to run reports from your flowchart, which is a built-in capability in Visio. If you want to take advantage of any of those data-related capabilities, simply put a column name and put some data in it. Important point, if your column names happen to match exactly to pre-existing data fields in Visio, and for example, the four that are here, owner, cost, start date, and end date, might be in that category. Owner is, cost is. Those are predefined fields in flowchart templates. Or the other alternative is if you specify a column name that doesn't already exist in the Visio shape, well, guess what? Visio will create that data field for you in all the shapes in the diagram as it builds the diagram. So hope that gives you an idea what you're going to be looking to include in your data. And let's see what this looks like. Let's go to Visio. And I'm going to go to the New tab. And up top are are thumbnails for templates I've used recently. And because I've used them recently, the two that we want here are right here at the top, but I want to show you where to find them. If you click on templates and go to the flowchart template, so click once and open that category, the flowchart category, this is where all the usual flowchart related templates are located, including the audit diagram, the basic flowchart, and the cross-functional flowchart for Data Visualizer. So you can see the Excel icon in the upper left corner of each of those three. In my case, I'm going to click Basic Flowchart. Here's that pop-up I showed you a screenshot of before. I can create my flowchart either from a sample diagram or from a blank page. I'll go with the blank page. And oops, I clicked the wrong icon, wrong thumbnail, excuse me. Let me click this one. And here's where I see, instead of the sample diagrams, we see Excel data template. So if I wanted to open a brand new template, I could do that, or if I wanted to create a new diagram from the Excel data template, I could do that. I'm just going to click Create. And now a wizard appears. I'm going to take the really fast way through this wizard, first time through, and then I'll show you some details in a moment. I'm going to click the Browse button and go to a folder here where I have this file, 10 process data for flowcharts. Click Open. Notice I'm not even showing you the data yet. We'll get to that in a second. Visio has opened that Excel workbook and it's found a table called Process Map Data. Guess what? That's exactly the right one. So watch this magic. Click Finish. Flowchart. I'm going to close this pane called Data Graphic Fields. Don't need that. Let's zoom in a little bit, and we see we have steps in a process. We see we have one decision. Yes goes this way. Hire this person. They say yes. We send them a contract and so forth. And no leads back to selecting another candidate. So this flowchart, which didn't exist mere seconds ago, is 100% the result of data defined in Excel. I'll show you a second quick example. This time I'm going to choose the cross-functional flowchart and choose Create. And this time I'm going to select a different file that is designed for flowcharts, and I'll show you the differences in a moment. Let's choose this one, 25, open, and once again, Visio has opened the file, found a table, that's the right one, so I'll click Finish. And once again, in a matter of seconds, I now have a flowchart. Now this, for intentional reasons, is exactly the same process that we looked at a moment ago for this hiring scenario. But now notice that the blocks, the steps in the process, are divided between a swim lane called Business Unit and one called Human Resources. Here's that decision. Does the candidate say yes? If so, proceed to the right. If not, go back to select a new candidate. So very similar data, just a slight addition of more information, and we have instant flowchart. So that's what it looks like quickly in action. What we want to do, though, is we want to take a look at the details. You can launch the wizard in either of two ways. You can select the template, as I did in each of those cases, swim lane and the conventional flowchart. And if you choose those templates, Visio will launch the wizard automatically. But what do you do if you're already in a diagram and you want to launch this wizard from within that diagram? On the Data tab, which appears in Visio Plan 2, you'll find over on the left a button that says Create from Data. That's the key. And when you do that, that will launch the wizard. Now, let me page through the wizard screens here with you. So far, the only one you've seen is this first one. This happens to be the one I didn't dwell on, but this is the one for the, I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. This is what you did see. This is the one for flowchart, creating a flowchart. I selected by browsing and selected a diagram, and Visio found the table. The next page in the wizard is one that allows me to specify some additional details or change the defaults for which columns mean which things. There's another that allows me to specify which shapes correspond to which shape names. Normally, the defaults are going to be fine, but I'll show you a reason in just a moment why you might care about something different. And here's that example. My company makes TaskMap. I've already mentioned that, the process mapping alternative to a flowchart. We have a version of TaskMap that we call TaskMap Lite that involves no code, unlike the main TaskMap product. So it's simply an intelligent set of shapes in a stencil and a template that includes that stencil. If I want to use this data visualizer capability and map data rows in Excel to my shapes rather than to the standard flowchart swim lane diagram shapes, not a problem. I just need to have my stencil open. You notice TaskMap Lite stencil, and then simply dragging any of those shapes into the appropriate box for start, process, decision, and so forth allows me to change which shapes the data visualizer will use to create the diagram. The next page in the wizard allows me once again to use the data in my Excel workbook for other than default purposes. Once again, normally the defaults are going to be just fine, but if you need to do something a little bit different, you can. And now let's walk through and take a look at a little bit more. And I'm going to start with the data. So this is the data for the flowchart. So we have step IDs, descriptions, next step ID, connector label, as you saw on the slide. And the field for shape type is actually a dropdown. In the Excel template, this dropdown includes the names of all of the shapes that are in the standard flowchart stencil. So you'll see all the usual suspects, process, decision, and so forth, as well as some of the less frequently used and some custom shapes that are part of the standard flowchart stencil. So you don't even have to type those. You can just use the dropdown. I've got some representative data here for the owner of each step, the approximate cost of each step, and so forth, start dates, end dates. And I've also included alt description. If your focus includes, and it really should, if your focus includes making your diagrams accessible, one way to make a Visio diagram more accessible is to include alt text, an alt description, so that if someone with limited sight is using a screen reader, for example, screen readers are typically designed to focus on the alt text. So just as that's true for images in a PowerPoint presentation, you can specify alt text. We can include an alt description aimed at screen readers here. So I've decided to be a good doobie here, and I've included that alt description. In my case, it's the same as the text that's in the process step description that appears on each box, because I think it's sufficiently descriptive, but this is my opportunity to be more specific and elaborate a bit, keeping in mind someone who has limited sight might struggle with just the few words that are part of the step description. So that's the data. Let's go back to Visio, and I'm going to delete the flowchart that's here that we built a moment ago. I'm going to take advantage of what I showed you. I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I'm going to click Create from Data to launch the wizard. I'll select the same file. That's the one number 10 here. Click Open. Let Visio find the table. And by the way, if you have multiple data tables, you can use the dropdown to tell Visio which is the correct one. In this case, for simplicity's sake, I only have the one. I'm going to click Next. And now you do see the rest of the second page leading through the rest of the screens here. This is where if a different column was the column that contained the next step ID, I could just take that column and drag it on and drop it on top of where it says process step ID. It's correct as it is, so I don't want to mess it up. But let's just prove the point here. I've deleted the process step column, so I take next step ID, drop it on here, and now that shows what the connectivity will be. Same thing for the other two fields that are here, process step and shape type. Click Next, and oops. I think I had, let's see, aren't unique. Let me go back to my data. It says my data values are not unique. 1799. Well, let me save and try that again.
Scott, I think you put the next step ID in place of where the process step ID was there when you recreated it.
I'm glad somebody's watching. Thank you, Ken. You're absolutely right. I was thinking one thing and doing something else. Never done that before. Thank you. Yeah, so click next, and lo and behold. So here again, if I am using my task map light shapes, for example, I'd simply drag a different shape and drop it into the appropriate place in order to specify, use this shape instead for that shape type. This last page in the flowchart wizard is about specifying the things like the delimiter. When we have the connectivity arrows and we want to specify text that goes on those arrows, the default is a comma. I can use other delimiters if I want, other parameters I can change here, but these are all fine. The next step ID is appropriate, and we're going to connect using the columns. It is possible to simply connect everything sequentially. So if you have a very simple flowchart and you haven't bothered to number everything uniquely, you can just have Visio build the diagram in the order in which your rows of data appear in the Excel workbook. But generally speaking, what I will want to do, because I'm creating flowcharts that have branches and decisions, I'm going to want to be specific and say, connect use the next step ID column as the means for doing the linkage. So again, I click finish, and we're done. And as before, we now see that this is the same flowchart that we were looking at a moment ago. But you can change it, you can affect it by altering your data. Bear with me 1 second here. I just want to check one thing in my notes. Yeah, we'll come back to the synchronizing part of it in a moment. In fact, right now, let's do that. I'll show you the swim lane diagram in a moment in more detail, and we'll do that and combine it with the synchronizing idea. As I mentioned, the data and the diagram are synchronized in both directions. The key to understanding how to make this happen is something called a container. If I go back to the Visio diagram for a second, you'll notice that there's a border around this flowchart. If I click on the background of the page, it's got a blue line around it, and there's the word heading in the upper corner here. This is a special kind of Visio shape called a container. One of my absolute favorite things to talk about and play with and use in production in Visio is something called containers and lists for creating structured diagrams. Topic for another time. The significance right now is that if I select this container by clicking on the edge, there's a special tab that appears here. And so let's take a look at what that's going to do for us. Back to the slide here. When you select the container, then you'll have this extra tab that appears, and it allows you to do things like refresh the diagram from data changes or update the source data because the diagram has changed. So it's selecting the container, that's the critical first step, and then using the Data Tools tab in order to be able to do this and a couple of the subsequent things that we'll talk about. So let's take a look at the flowchart. Let me go to the data first, and let's look at what's different about flowchart data. We've got the data here, it is. So actually, I'll take it back. Let me open this diagram, or rather this data. So here's something that looks very similar to what we looked at for the flowchart. The critical difference is two things, two columns, a function column and a phase column. The function column is the name that will be or should be at the head of the swim lane. So now that we're going to create a swim lane diagram, we do indeed need to specify what names should be at the head in each case. Phases are optional, and I'm going to create this diagram first without, and then we'll go back and make an update. In this case, let's use this data. This is file number 20. So I'm going to go back here to the Visio diagram, take this swim lane. I'm going to select the header around the swim lane diagram and press the delete key. With the container selected, my pressing the delete key says to Visio, delete the container and everything that resides in it. In this case, that's the entire swim lane diagram. We're going to go to the Data tab, and let's create from data. And now we're going to, excuse me, we're going to create a cross-functional flowchart, aka swim lane diagram. So we'll browse, go back and find file 20, click open. And now that instead of clicking finish, we'll click next. And here's an extra page. The flowchart wizard only has 4 pages. The swim lane wizard has 5 because we need to identify the columns of data that identify the functions and the phases. So they are, because it's easier, they're named function and phase, but of course they don't have to be. I can drag any column into the appropriate position in order to make this work. Beyond that, the next several pages are the same as they were in the flowchart case. So here's where we identify the step ID, description, and shape type, the shapes themselves, and then the connectivity information. So let's click finish. And we see that we now have a diagram that looks like the one we had a few minutes ago. And it does indeed have, let's close this data graphic fields pane. It does indeed have the appropriate headings at the top, at the head of each swim lane. So what can we do with this now that we have it in place? Well, we can do a couple of things. One is we might look at this and say, you know, I really think I need to understand this hiring process in phases. So let's go back to our data and let's fill in some phases in this column over here. So for example, we might say that the first phase is one when we identify that we have a new job opening. So let's just call this new opening. And that phase name applies to several steps down through advertising the open job. So this is the phase in which we find that there's a hiring need, we log the hiring request in our database, prepare a job description, open and advertise that open job. The next phase is one in which we're going to interview candidates. So that phase includes not only this step, but also selecting a candidate, making a job offer, and waiting for the response from the candidate. So let's call that the interview phase. And then finally, we have an onboarding phase where the candidate has said yes. And so we will take that onboarding phase and copy that name down through to the end. So we've organized our data into 3 phases. I've promised that this data is synchronized with the diagram. So let's save our changes here in the data. Let's go back to our swim lane diagram. And again, just to make the point, if I have not selected the container, I don't see the tab that I need. But if I do select the container, my data tools tab is here. And now I can say refresh diagram. So let's click OK. And we see something a little bit different. It looks essentially the same, but we now have phases: new opening, interview, and onboarding. So the steps that I said were part of each phase in the data are reflected correctly here in the Visio diagram. So it really doesn't get much easier than that. I think it's refreshing to find a capability like this that is as intuitive and easy as this really is. And by the way, this does work in both directions, as I've promised. For example, if I go to this part of the diagram here, let's zoom in on the onboarding phase. And let's say, I look at, we need to send a contract to the employee. We need to make an ID card, assign an office. And I realize, oh my gosh, we forgot to talk to IT and get computing facilities for this person. So let's do this. Let's take a process step and let's drop it right here in the middle. And Visio kind of said, okay, we're going to put it wherever I feel like. Let's do this a little bit differently. I'm going to move a couple of lines around here just to make this aesthetically a little more pleasing. And let's put this here. There we go. And let's type some text on here. This is contact IT, just to keep it simple. So that's the description associated with this particular task that we've just added. Remember, at the moment, our data looks like this. It's the original 17 original rows down through row 17. Let's go back to the diagram and let's click on the container that surrounds the diagram. Click on the Design Data Tools tab, and this time I'm going to update the source data. Click, and it says it's unable to do so because I still have the data open. So this is a case where Visio apparently needs write access, or does need write access. So let's try that again. Let's go back and click Update Source Data. And that's what's happening right now. Not terribly quickly tonight. That happens sometimes. Let's go with this diagram. That's interesting. Normally it just updates it in place. I'm not sure quite what that's about. We may have to try this again, but yes, I do want to replace it. You're not going to let me replace it. Fascinating. The fun of live demos. Let's do this once more here. Let's close it again. And let's try that one more time. Update. This might be one of those cases where I say to you, what you would have seen. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that's about. I tell you what, let's do something else. Let's just for the sake of argument, let me go back. I'm going to close the flowchart data. Let's go back to our flowchart and let's do a similar thing. Let's drop this step here. Let's contact IT and select the container. Go to the Design tab and update the data source. And this may just be the night when you'll have to take my word for it. It's looking like that's the case. Yeah, don't know. This is weird. I've done this many times and yeah, okay. So not happening tonight, but that's, it does work both ways. You can add shapes, you can actually delete shapes, you can change the process around fairly readily and update back to the data. Any questions so far? I've been rambling on here for 40 minutes or so. Any questions about how you use this, circumstances in which you might use it?
I don't see any questions in the queue, Scott.
Okay.
I will say, unfortunately, it looks like, and we figured out what happened with our attendance thing, that things did not get set up correctly for the meeting. So that's why the attendance is low, and you're not getting the questions, I think, because we're missing a lot of people. So, yeah, apologize for that.
Okay, well, that's all right. If anyone does have a question, feel free to just unmute. You can interrupt me as well. You don't have to rely on the chat. So. Earlier, I suggested that once you've gone to the hard work of creating a pair, a diagram, and an Excel workbook that are synchronized, and you've got a process that you like, but you are pretty sure other people need to use it, they don't have to recreate the wheel. The mechanism in Visio for Data Visualizer includes the export button that you see here on that same tab. So once again, you have to select the container so that the Data Tools tab appears. And then when you click the export button, you will export your diagram and the workbook as a pair. And in fact, Visio has a brand new file extension, a file type called VTPX for Visualizer Template Package. And that VTPX file does indeed contain both the workbook and the template. Both of them are saved as templates. So the VTPX file doesn't contain your original diagram or your original Excel workbook, but rather it contains a template version of both. All you need do is pass that VTPX file to somebody, they double click on it, and Visio automatically installs both. And knowing where it puts them is important, because otherwise you're going to go rummaging for them. It puts them into the custom office templates folder. So I don't know whether you've used that folder, if you've done much in the way of customizing Excel and creating templates, or for that matter, Word or PowerPoint works the same way. That's the default folder in which the Office products put their templates. So that's why this one is put there as well. You know what? Exporting is not really that interesting. I'm not going to bother to demonstrate that. It truly is two files stuffed into one. Double click the VTPX and it will install that new template. What I do want to do is make sure that there's a couple of minutes here to talk about what happens when you're Excel-centric rather than Visio-centric, the way John Marshall and I may be in that latter category. Most of the rest of you perhaps are in the former category. So if you are starting in Excel, you can go to the search bar and type in flowchart on the new page, and you'll find at least these. There may be other templates that appear as well, but you will find two thumbnails over here on the left that look a lot like those thumbnails that we saw in Visio. These are the corresponding, the template files that correspond exactly to creating a flowchart, creating a swim lane diagram, as we've done it starting in Visio. So that's one way to get started. Doing this does require a Visio license. So this is a case where you're just starting in Excel in order to enter your data. And once you've done that, then you're going to use the Table Design tab in Excel and the Export button, which now will have, in the subscription versions of Excel, now we'll have this option to export table to Visio diagram. So let's just take a quick look. Let me launch Excel and move that over to the appropriate screen here. Let's type flowchart and let's close that. Didn't want to go there to that one. That opened as a result of the confusion in Visio a little bit ago. So let's try that one more time here. Let's search for flowchart templates. And as promised, here's one for the basic flowchart. So let's select that, click Create. This is just what we saw before, 3 tabs, the overview, the example, the tab in which you're going to enter your data, and there's also, in this particular case, because you started with Excel, Microsoft looks at this as a selling opportunity. So just in case you don't yet have Visio Plan 2, here's a convenient button you can click in order to be taken to a web page where you can solve that particular problem. But this is the place where now I can insert additional rows and enter my data. Notice I had said earlier that this process ID can be alphanumeric, and that is the example we see here, P100. Fill in the rest. The drop downs do apply here, so I can pick which shapes belong to each step in the process. That's good. Once I've done that, then as I mentioned on the Table Design tab, there is the Export button, and here's where I can export table to Visio diagram. So it's pretty straightforward. But remember, this is the option that does require that you have a Visio license in addition to having Excel.
Hey, Scott, we've got a quick question here from Ron. He says,
Sure
I
thing.
just want to confirm that there is no free Visio online without a Visio subscription.
That is correct. There is not a version of Visio that's free yet. And I say that, I just have to think what the NDA, yeah, I can't say that. I can't say anything further. There's not a free version of Visio yet. If there should be at some point in the future, it will not include this capability because, as you can imagine, a free version of anything is not going to include the icing on top of the cake. So, Ron, it is correct that no free version. You would need to have a Visio subscription to do everything we've done up until this moment.
I just wish that they would increase the cost of my Office subscription by $1 a month and include it and call it a day with part of Office would be beautiful, you know. But hey.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you, Ken. It's a long-standing problem, or not problem, I guess, but a long-standing philosophy that Microsoft has had. As most of you probably realize, the same thing is true of Project. You know, it's a separate subscription or a separate license for Project as it is for Visio. They're not included as part of the Office suite licenses.
That's funny. I've never noticed with Project, but I haven't really needed Project Visio. I have.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, if you're you know, somebody whose life revolves around Project, trust me, you've noticed that because you've paid for Office and said, "Where's my Project?" and it ain't there.
Absolutely.
So, same issue, same department that makes the decision, you know.
Yeah, as Ron says here, yeah, the Visio and Project are not part of any Office bundles. A long-standing pet peeve of his. You know, mine too, Ron. I mean, as I say, I haven't really had a huge need for Project, but Visio certainly. I mean, I've never understood why the top tier plans haven't included that. I mean, it just seemed to be a logical fit to me. But hey, you know, we don't make those decisions, do we, Scott?
Yeah, no, we get to complain about them, but that's our privilege, right?
Exactly. There you go.
But let's look at the don't need a Visio license alternative, because this is actually pretty powerful and pretty capable. So how do you get there? It's these other 3 templates that appeared when I typed flowchart, the ones that have blue and say Office add-in ready underneath them. There is one for flowchart, one for swimlane diagram, and interestingly, one for org charts. And I say interestingly because that's not a capability you have yet when you start with Visio and the Excel workbook we've been looking at. So this is a new capability. I'm going to concentrate on flowcharts, but if we have a minute and anyone cares, I can show you how it works for an org chart as well. The basic idea is similar. You start with the right template, and in order to have that right template, you need to get the Visio add-in, although you may very well find it's already there. You'll notice this. You can go to the Office add-ins store and search for Visio, and you will find the Visio data visualizer, which you can add, but you may find it's already there. So look at your copy of Excel and see whether, in addition to Power BI, sitting there is a Visio icon. I believe this is true in just about every case at this point. The good news is, once it's there, you just click the button and you have a pop-up that we'll take a look at for real right now. So let's close this. And let's not save it. We don't need it. Let's start again with File New. And actually, I don't even need to. I did it recently enough that it's here, basic flowchart from data. Let's click once to select it. Here's our Office add-in ready. Click Create. And what you get is this pop-up. What do I want? Do I want a quick start flowchart, a horizontal, a hierarchy diagram, or a vertical orientation for my flowchart? I will tell you, as a business process guy, I'm a left to right kind of flowchart guy. I like to create my flowcharts the way my brain reads, which is left to right. Arabic, Hebrew, and a few other scripts notwithstanding, that's the way many people's brains function. So I like my flowcharts to follow that same left to right pattern. So I'm going to choose horizontal. And what you end up with is two things. You end up with some sample data and a diagram that was created dynamically from that data. Now, a couple of words about this diagram. This is an actual Visio diagram. If you have a Visio license, you can actually get at it directly from within Visio. If you do not, it's still a valid Visio diagram, but the only place it lives is here inside this add-in inside Excel. But the really good news is that this truly is dynamic. I'm going to insert an extra row here. I'm going to add a P250 and do other stuff, something really descriptive. And I'm going to change what happens after P200 to say, in the yes case, we're going to go to 250 instead of 300. And in the no case, we'll still go to P400. I do need to update 250 to say where we go after that. And that, of course, is going to be P300. And when I finish, I can click the refresh button and watch my diagram here when I click refresh. And there we go. We now have this step that says do other stuff that is on the yes path. I can make those changes all day long. I could actually go get my data from my workbook and paste it in here and have the flowchart be a completely different flowchart simply by pasting my data in instead of using the stuff that was provided here as a sample. This diagram is viewable, and I can pan and zoom through it using control mouse wheel or using the sliders here. It truly is a Visio diagram that is mine to play with. If I click the edit button, this is the point at which the question of whether I have a Visio license or not comes into play, because if I do, great, I can edit this thing in Visio, otherwise not.
Scott, question for you on that Visio license. I assume that is, once again, a Plan 2 license. If you have a copy of Visio 2019 or something like that, you're still stuck, right?
Actually, that's partially true. So good surmise. The distinction is that if you open this diagram in Visio 2019 or 2016, it will still be a fully editable flowchart, but you're going to break the connection to the data. So you can edit it, but whether you should is a relevant question.
Fair enough. Would you also be able to actually do a quick demo of the org chart? I see that
Absolutely.
Ron has given some feedback that I believe, if I'm interpreting this correctly, he's not a fan of the original org chart component that is in the smart art kind of thing. So
yes,
he and the Visio version would probably be better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I cringe when I see flowcharts people have created in PowerPoint using smart art, or even in Word, or for that matter, sometimes I cringe at ones I've seen created in Excel. So let's see what happens. I actually haven't tried this.
It's hard to imagine anybody abusing Excel and coming up with something that's not correct.
Yeah, no, I struggle to imagine that. Yeah. That's not what I was expecting. Let's search in the right place. I apologize, user error there. I searched for existing diagrams, not templates. Let's go to new and type org chart. And sure enough, here's the org chart from data. So let's create that. And it won't surprise you, it doesn't look substantially different. It is the same exact idea. Rows of data and a corresponding, in this case, org chart rather than flowchart. Same principles apply. If I want to add somebody to my organization, I can insert, and let's say this is ID 22, just for the sake of argument. Whoops, twos would be better than @ signs, and we'll go with my daughter's all through my life have given me a hard time about the fact that I use Fred for everything. Anytime I need to make a name, I always make up a name. I always use Fred. So we'll go with Fred Smart, just for the heck of it. And he's important. So his title is important. He reports to ID 1, and his role type. And the role type here, by the way, is what causes the visual differentiation that you see in the diagram. So the executives, the managers, the positions, the consultants. Let's choose consultant and see how that happens to appear here. Let's refresh the diagram. And here we have Mr. Smart, who's important. And notice his color bar is a little bit different color than the others. So the consultant is recognizable. So Ron, does that give you some ideas or perhaps even some hope that you can create a more usable org chart rather than having to deal with smart art? In lieu of an answer, I'll hope that's the case. So.
Yep.
Okay, he says,
yes, it definitely looks better.
Good. I just happened to glance over at the other screen. So, yeah. So that's when Visio is not required. And as I mentioned, I've got some slides here. If you're interested in copies of the slide deck as a refresher, or I'm noticing that some people are arriving perhaps because of the time error on the Meetup page. If you are just arriving, or if you've been here all along and you're interested in copies of the slides, I'll put my email address on the screen in a moment, Scott@Visio Step by Step. But feel free, and if you want these as a refresher or to pique your interest in looking for additional information about these capabilities, feel free to just ask for them. The key in visualizing data in any sense, and I'll just touch on a couple of key points here, is to know that shapes can have data in the first place. And the key is, as you see here, if you right-click on any shape in Visio and select Data and Shape Data, that will open the Shape Data window, where you can either manually enter data, or what we've been doing is to actually have Visio do that for us. So if I go back to one of these flowcharts that we created, here's the swim lane version. Let me do just that. Let me right-click and choose Data and Shape Data. And normally when you open this window, by the way, it's probably going to be floating over the screen like this, because 95+% of the diagrams I work on in Visio involve data. I like to have this thing docked over here on the right. So I just dock it. You can change the width. Like many windows, you have some flexibility here. But I like to have my stencils always open on the left, my shape data window always open on the right. But you'll notice as I click through these shapes, these are shapes that have data in them, with the exception of the one I added manually, by the way, because of course I added that manually. I did not type any data in it yet, other than putting contact IT is what that should say, on the shape. But these others do have data, and that is the data from the Excel workbook. So shapes can contain data, and lots of value can accrue therefrom. If you're looking for shapes that contain data, you don't have to look very far. These are examples of the many templates in Visio whose stencils include shapes that do have data. We've clearly focused mostly on the flowchart and the cross-functional flowchart for our purposes this evening. But org charts, all these other diagrams do have shapes with data. And there are lots of ways to visualize it. Again, not demonstrating that tonight, but lots of places on the web to go find out more about this capability. So to summarize, Data Visualizer is in Plan 2. Sorry, but that's where it is, and the only place it is. You can start in Visio, you can start in Excel, and with Excel, you can either have a license for Visio or not and still make diagrams. Diagrams are synchronized in both directions. You can create templates that package your custom diagram and custom workbook so that others can take advantage of your hard work. And you can apply data graphics by learning that elsewhere. Free trial of Visio, product team blog. The product team blog, by the way, goes through periods where it's not very active and then is very active. It's in one of those active spells at the moment. So you'll find some good information there about things that are happening, things that are coming, things that have already arrived that relate to Visio. There is a Visio section of the Microsoft Answers forum. I hang around at Experts Exchange and answer questions there. There's also a Visio enthusiast group at LinkedIn where you'll find, similar to the product team blog, it goes through spells where it's active more or less. Happens to be pretty active this year for some reason. So there's some good information you'll find there about the Visio world. There are 3 resources here. And again, if you want copies of these slides, you'll have the links directly available. 3 resources that are specifically about Data Visualizer. And then some stuff about me and my books and the LinkedIn learning courses. I just put 4 of the 6 here, including one that I mentioned at the outset that is all about best practices for creating flowcharts, whether you happen to use Visio or not, but still best practices for flowcharts. The Visio tips and tricks course is a lot of fun. It's I think it's about 30, maybe not quite that many, 20 something 3 or 4 minute videos of what I think are the best things to know about how to use Visio more effectively. And then there is actually a short course on this data visualizer capability. So you'll find that there as well. And if you're truly interested in learning about visualizing data, then the longest of the 4 courses is the one on the subject of Visio and data. So here is the email address, scott@visiostepbystep.com. I would be happy to provide copies of the slides, even the sample files if you're interested in those. Happy to give you those as well. Nothing proprietary about them. At VisProcess, I'm a Visio process guy, so that's my Twitter handle. And you'll find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me or join in conversation with me on LinkedIn. Happy to have you do so. And with that, Ken, I think I have run the course.
All right. Well, I got one question for you that I have before
Yes.
before I let you go on this one, and that is, and obviously without violating any NDA, if there's any component to that, but it's interesting to actually see the Office app that is coming out with these things to create, obviously the different diagrams from org charts and a couple of flow charts there. Are you aware that if they're going to be adding any additional ones later for people who don't have that Visio license to be able to create directly from Excel?
I believe that's part of the plan, yes. And I'm not speaking out of turn by saying that. So the Visio team has said at Ignite and other public forums that the flowchart, swimlane, org chart are a starting point, and that they definitely have plans for other diagram types.
Cool.
I don't know specifically which ones. I mean, think about anything that needs to be connected, where shapes need to be connected to each other. Network diagrams would be a logical thing to think about. What else has connected shapes in it? Those are the kinds of things that I think you'll see coming up.
Well, I mean, I see that actually is a really nice way to actually be able to actually get me to the point where I might actually want that Visio Plan 2 licenses to edit these things, right? Because I mean, if I can actually see it in action and go, okay, now I want to go bigger. Well, now you're getting to where I might start looking and playing where I think the original templates that kind of hit you with well, you need this Plan 2 license. Like, well, why?
So what? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that's interesting. It's kind of cool. I didn't realize that those existed, and
they've sort of flown in under the radar in the last year or so. There've been some product team posts. In fact, the Visio product team blog that I mentioned a moment ago, you'll find information there. There are help pages at Docs, Microsoft Docs, so you'll see information about the capabilities there as well.
Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. Nice to see. I learned something tonight. Awesome. Love it when that happens.
Good. Yeah, me too. It's an accident sometimes, but I still like it.
Thanks often. All right. Are there any other questions that we have that anybody wants to ask of Scott while we have them? I see.
Feel free to unmute and just raise your voice.
Absolutely. I see that that Ron was trying to give you a task, but it looks like John told him that the job's already been done, so you don't have to do any work there. So that's
Oh, well, okay then.
um, so yeah, I don't see anybody unmuting at this point either. So
Okay.
yeah, I guess we're question free. So, apologies to everybody who got the invite. Unfortunately, there's a challenge with the site. I guess that when we create a meetup, it automatically gives us the 7 p.m. on the West Coast, and we didn't have that in our checklist to actually have fixed. So that's now in our checklist, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. I apologize, Scott, for bringing you a big enough audience today. But the good news is for those of you who got here late, we are going to be recording, or well, this was recorded, so we are going to be posting it on my YouTube channel, so we can always catch the parts that you missed and whatnot. And we'll do better next time. Let me say that. So.
Well, I look at it this way, Ken. The exorbitant amount of money you paid me to be here tonight is the per person fee is actually pretty extraordinary
There you
because
go.
there were
There you
fewer
go.
people, right?
Oh, exactly. Well, I always say with technology, right? It's awesome when it works, and sometimes we're really good at not making it work perfect, right? So, but
Yep.
we try and learn and do the best that we can. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so, yeah. So Ron, definitely we'll get that up, and we'll make sure you can see the first half. And John, you're absolutely right. I pay for all Scott's flights when he comes to these things online. So there you
Yep.
go.
Hey, and actually, I'm looking forward to that moment when I can actually speak to your user group in person, because you're in one of my favorite places to visit on the planet. So
I'm
any
looking
excuse.
forward to when we get to do that again in person.
Yeah.
I say, I mean, we're starting to get to the point where vaccines are starting to reach some good levels and whatnot. So I mean, I don't anticipate that we'll be seeing that before, oh, I don't know, probably before the end of the year. But certainly,
Yeah.
our hope is that we're back in person at least for some of our sessions, in 2022. So